He came to court for a business deal, but 4 little girls on a bench changed his life with just 3 words: "We're hungry, sir." Nicholas Evans arrived at the downtown courthouse just before 10 in the morning, expecting to be in and out in less than 20 minutes. It was supposed to be a routine errand, signing and collecting final documents for a merger his company had been working on for months. Dressed in his signature light gray tailored suit, every detail of his appearance was controlled and immaculate. His dark hair was combed back with intention, and his icy blue eyes scanned the lobby without pause. He walked with the calm precision of a man used to having doors open before he even reached them. Time was his currency, and he spent it carefully. He stepped into the familiar marble foyer, where the polished floors reflected the harsh glow of institutional lighting. Lawyers passed by with purpose, security guards stood casually by the metal detectors, and the smell of paper and faint perfume lingered in the air. Nicholas glanced at his watch, planning to be back in the office before lunch. But then, something unusual caught the edge of his vision: a group of 4 little girls, sitting quietly on a wooden bench just outside one of the courtrooms. They couldn't have been older than 6. All of them had blonde hair, braided or loosely tied back, and strikingly bright blue eyes. 2 wore pale yellow dresses, the other 2 wore soft pink. They sat close together, their feet not quite touching the floor, their expressions somber and exhausted. They looked completely out of place in a courthouse full of adults and briefcases. No toys. No parents. No signs of supervision. Just 4 tiny figures huddled together in silence. Nicholas slowed his pace and turned toward them, something instinctual stopping him. He walked up slowly, not wanting to alarm them, and lowered himself to their level. "Are you lost?" he asked gently. One of the girls in a yellow dress looked up at him, her face calm but her eyes tired. She shook her head slightly. "No," she said. "We're waiting." "Waiting for who?" he asked. "Our mom," said another girl. "She's in court." He looked around the hallway. No adult seemed to be paying attention to them. "How long have you been here?" he asked. The girl shrugged. "A while. We're hungry." Those 2 words stopped him cold. He looked at them again, really looked, and noticed how thin they were, how dry their lips were, how their eyes avoided contact the way children did when they'd been taught not to ask for too much. They weren't just sitting quietly, they were surviving. Nicholas stood and scanned the room again. He should have walked away. It wasn't his business. He was a CEO, not a social worker. But something in their quiet presence struck a chord in him that hadn't been touched in years. He turned to the court officer at the nearby desk. "Excuse me," he said. "Do you know who these girls belong to?" The officer looked over, nodded vaguely. "Yeah, their mom's in the courtroom down the hall. Some theft case. They've been there a while." "No one came with them." Nicholas frowned. "They've been here all morning?" The officer shrugged. "Think so. Maybe longer." With no more than that, the officer returned to his paperwork. Nicholas turned back to the girls. "Have you eaten anything today?" he asked. They shook their heads. One of the girls tried to smile but didn't quite make it. Nicholas didn't think. He acted. "Wait here," he said, and walked out of the courthouse without another word. 15 minutes later, he returned with bags of food from the nearest cafe, sandwiches, juice boxes, fruit. He handed the food to the girls, expecting them to devour it, but they didn't. They opened the bags carefully, passed items between themselves, and ate slowly, quietly, with a strange kind of discipline. Not desperation. Just quiet gratitude. He sat down on the bench next to them, still unsure what he was doing or why. He couldn't stop watching them. They didn't beg. They didn't cry. They didn't ask for anything. But somehow, they were saying everything. And in that moment, Nicholas Evans, a man who lived by logic, numbers, and power, felt something crack open inside him. Something small, but irreversible. Nicholas stayed on that wooden bench far longer than he expected. The courthouse hallway, usually just a transition space between obligation and resolution, had become the place where something unfamiliar stirred inside him. He kept glancing at the girls, observing their quiet coordination. They weren't just siblings, they were a unit. One of the girls in pink handed her sandwich to the one in yellow when she noticed hers had less filling. Another wiped the youngest's mouth with a napkin and smoothed her dress without being asked. They had clearly done this, looked after each other, many times before. There was no whining, no fussing, no playfulness. Only patience. And hunger, not just for food, but for safety. As they ate, Nicholas leaned back and studied the courtroom door across from them. The nameplate read, Judge Harper. That's where their mother was. He wondered what kind of woman had raised these girls to be so resilient and so heartbreakingly restrained. He wondered why she had brought them to court at all, why no one else had stepped in, why this situation had been allowed to go so unnoticed by everyone around them. A dozen people had passed them by, and no one had looked twice. One of the girls, the one who had spoken to him first, turned to him again. "Are you a lawyer?" she asked. He shook his head. "No. I'm someone who's here for some papers." She tilted her head. "You wear a fancy watch. Like Mr. Garrett." Nicholas blinked. "Who's Mr. Garrett?" She exchanged a glance with her sister, then looked down. "Mama's boss. He's the one who said she did something bad." The words were simple, but they punched through him with unsettling clarity. He leaned forward a little. "Do you know what he said she did?" "She didn't do it," the girl in pink answered quickly. "Mama said he lied because he was mad. She said he wanted to do bad things, and when she said no, he got mean." Nicholas inhaled slowly. That sentence unraveled more than he was ready for. He knew the type. He had worked with powerful men long enough to recognize how easily someone in control could twist the truth. A man like Garrett, rich, protected, manipulative, could destroy someone like Anna Ray with a single accusation. Especially if she had no resources, no voice, and no one on her side. In that moment, Nicholas realized this wasn't just about kindness or momentary compassion. This was about justice. About seeing something broken and knowing he had the tools to fix it. He felt that old business instinct, the drive to investigate, to uncover, to outmaneuver, but for once, it wasn't about profit. It was about doing what no one else was willing to. A courtroom clerk passed by, and Nicholas stopped him. "The case being held in Judge Harper's room, Anna Ray. Do you have the docket or a summary?" The clerk hesitated. "Are you involved in the case?" "I might be," Nicholas said calmly, flashing the kind of authoritative smile that usually opened doors. "I know her employer. I want to make sure the truth is heard." The clerk, recognizing his name from several high-profile court donations, returned a few minutes later with a printed summary. Nicholas scanned the page, his jaw tightening. Theft of personal property. 1 count. Item, a Patek Philippe watch valued at over $80,000. The employer listed, Garrett D. Brown, senior partner at a mid-tier but well-connected law firm. Nicholas knew that name. Brown had been on the periphery of some questionable dealings in the past but had always stayed just clean enough to avoid fallout. He was the type of man who played golf with judges and thought HR complaints were merely female mood swings. The courtroom doors opened at last, and a small group of people exited. Among them was a thin, pale woman with worn features and a sharp, observant gaze. Her brown hair was pulled into a loose bun, her dress clean but clearly second-hand. She clutched a stack of folders to her chest, and her eyes went straight to the bench. The moment she saw her daughters, her expression changed from exhaustion to urgency. She hurried over. "Girls," she said in a strained voice. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know it would take this long. Did anyone?" "They ate," said the oldest. "He brought food." The woman looked up at Nicholas, confused. "You did?" He stood, offering a small nod. "They said they were hungry. I couldn't just walk away." The woman's mouth tightened, like she wasn't used to accepting kindness. "Thank you," she said. "You didn't have to do that." "No," he said quietly. "But someone should have." She blinked, clearly taken aback by his sincerity. "I'm Anna," she said after a pause. "Anna Ray." "Nicholas Evans," he replied. She froze for a moment, recognizing the name. "The Nicholas Evans?" He gave a modest nod. "It's just a name." "You don't belong in this hallway," she said softly. He glanced at the girls, then back at her. "Maybe today I do." Anna bit her lip, her arms tightening around the folders. Nicholas could see how hard she was trying not to show weakness, how she carried every ounce of fear and pride like armor. But the cracks were visible: fatigue, injustice, hopelessness. She didn't ask for help. She didn't plead. And that moved him more than if she had broken down right in front of him. "I read the summary," he said carefully. "If there's anything I can do. I know lawyers. Good ones." She shook her head quickly. "No, I can't afford." "I didn't ask for payment," he interrupted. "I asked if I could help." There was silence between them. The girls watched, wide-eyed, unsure what this meant. Finally, Anna spoke. "If I say yes, what happens next?" Nicholas glanced again at her daughters, 4 girls who deserved more than a bench and fear and cold silence. He looked back at Anna. "Then we fight," he said. "And this time, you won't be doing it alone." The next morning, Nicholas arrived at his office earlier than usual, but his mind wasn't on mergers or meetings. He had barely slept the night before, too distracted by what he had seen and learned in the courthouse. Every time he closed his eyes, he pictured the girls sitting quietly on that bench, too polite to complain, too used to waiting. He kept thinking about Anna, how she had looked at him like she couldn't afford to hope, and how carefully she held herself together in front of her children. Something about her story unsettled him more deeply than he expected. Not just because of the injustice, but because of how easily it could have gone unnoticed. He had walked into that building with every intention of leaving unchanged. Instead, he walked out with a responsibility he hadn't planned for. As soon as his assistant, Grace, stepped into his office, he called her over. "I need you to find everything you can on a man named Garrett D. Brown. He's a senior partner at Kelmore and Bell." Grace, ever efficient and unflappable, gave him a curious glance. "You're not suing him, are you?" "Not yet," he said, dead serious. "But I want to know what kind of man he is before I decide how far I'm going." By mid-afternoon, he had a thick file on his desk. Garrett Brown, as expected, had a spotless public record. Respected in the legal community, no formal complaints on file, multiple charitable donations, and an active member of a high-end golf club. But as Nicholas dug deeper, reading between the lines, looking through employee turnover reports and anonymous online reviews, he began to see the pattern. Several women had quietly left the firm over the years, their exits all abrupt and unexplained. None had ever spoken publicly, but there were whispers. Off-the-record comments on legal forums. Subtle red flags that never made it to HR documentation. Nicholas had seen it before. A man who used power as protection. A man who understood the system well enough to abuse it without leaving fingerprints. He called his legal counsel, but not the ones who handled corporate litigation. Instead, he reached out to an old contact, Michael Sloan, a former prosecutor turned defense attorney, now working primarily in civil rights and wrongful accusations. They hadn't spoken in over a year, but when Nicholas described the situation, Michael agreed to meet with Anna the very next day. When Nicholas called Anna to let her know, she hesitated. Her voice was wary. "I don't want to owe you anything." "You won't," he said firmly. "This isn't charity. It's justice." There was a pause on the line. Then, quietly, she said, "Okay. I'll come." The meeting was arranged in a neutral, private office space Nicholas kept for personal matters. When Anna arrived, she looked overwhelmed but composed. She had borrowed a nicer blouse, and her hair was neater, but the strain was still visible in her face. Her daughters were with a trusted neighbor for a few hours, something she rarely allowed, but she knew this meeting mattered. Michael greeted her with quiet respect, not condescension. He listened carefully as Anna explained everything. She told him about the weeks leading up to the accusation, how Garrett had started lingering too long after hours, how his compliments turned into invitations, how she had rejected him politely but clearly. And then, how the mood shifted. How he suddenly claimed his luxury watch was missing and reported her without warning. Michael took notes but also listened like a human being. When she finished, she looked down and said, "There's no proof. It's just my word." Nicholas, who had remained silent until then, spoke up. "There's more than your word. There's a pattern. And I don't think you're the first." Anna looked up, startled. "You found others?" "Possibly. Nothing confirmed yet, but we're working on it." Michael nodded. "This is more common than people realize. Men like Garrett make sure they appear untouchable. But once one thread unravels, the whole thing can fall apart. I'm going to help you file a countersuit for false accusation and workplace harassment." Anna shook her head in disbelief. "How will I ever afford that?" Nicholas leaned forward. "You won't." "I will." "But, why?" she asked, truly struggling to understand. "You don't even know me." Nicholas hesitated, then said something he hadn't told anyone else. "Because once, a long time ago, someone helped my mother when no one else would. I watched what it did to her when no one believed her. And I promised myself, if I ever had the power to stop that from happening to someone else, I'd use it. No matter what it cost." Anna didn't respond right away. But something shifted in her. A small flicker of trust. Not full belief, she'd been hurt too much for that, but something new. A fragile beginning. As they left the office, Nicholas walked her to the door. "Whatever happens next," he said, "you're not alone anymore." She nodded, clutching the folder Michael had given her. And for the first time since they met, she didn't look like she was preparing for the worst. She looked like someone starting to believe the worst might not come. The legal proceedings began quietly, but tension simmered beneath the surface like a storm building on the horizon. Anna's countersuit had been officially filed, and though the initial paperwork didn't shake the ground, it was enough to make Garrett Brown take notice. Nicholas knew it wouldn't take long for Garrett to retaliate. Men like him didn't let accusations slide without attempting to discredit or intimidate. True to form, just 2 days after the filing, anonymous reports surfaced online questioning Anna's credibility. Someone leaked her employment record, exaggerated disciplinary notes, and even implied she had been involved in other thefts, though there was no proof to back any of it. Nicholas recognized the tactic immediately. Garrett was leveraging his connections, using subtle character assassination to poison the narrative before it reached court. Nicholas wasn't surprised, but Anna was devastated. When she arrived at his office late that afternoon, her hands trembled as she clutched her phone. She had read the online posts, seen the cruel comments. Her voice was low and flat when she said, "They're calling me a liar. A thief. Some of the moms at school already stopped talking to me." She couldn't meet his eyes. What if this hurts the girls? What if I just made it worse for them? Nicholas walked around the desk and gently guided her to sit. "You didn't make this worse." "He did. You stood up for yourself. That takes more courage than most people can imagine. Anna shook her head. I just want to disappear. You don't get to disappear, he said firmly, but not unkindly. You have 4 daughters who need you to keep standing. Anna's eyes welled up. She looked like she hadn't slept. Like hope itself had become too heavy to carry. I didn't want to fight, she whispered. I just wanted to keep my job and protect my kids. Nicholas sat beside her, keeping his tone steady. I know. But now it's not just about you. He's done this before, and if no one stops him, he'll do it again. You're not just fighting for yourself. You're setting fire to something that needs to burn down. The words seemed to settle her. She inhaled slowly, wiped her eyes, and finally nodded. Then I guess we keep going. Meanwhile, Michael Sloan intensified the investigation. With Nicholas funding every step, he was able to hire 2 private researchers, discreet professionals with backgrounds in legal compliance and forensic HR analysis. Within days, they found a former paralegal who had left Garrett's firm 5 years earlier after a sudden and unexplained departure. Her name was Lauren Chase. She had signed a non-disclosure agreement, but once she heard Anna's story and learned that others were now coming forward, she agreed to meet. Nicholas, Anna, Michael, and Lauren met in a small, neutral office off-site. Lauren was nervous, constantly wringing her hands, but she eventually opened up. Garrett had followed a pattern, offering mentorship, growing increasingly familiar, then turning aggressive. When she rebuffed him, her annual review mysteriously tanked. She was accused of failing to handle confidential documents, then quietly pushed out of the firm. HR had buried it with a generous severance and a warning that if she spoke, she'd be sued. Michael asked, "Do you still have any written communication from him?" Lauren hesitated, then reached into her bag. "I erased a lot of it, but I printed the worst one before I left. I couldn't let myself forget what really happened." She handed over a folded piece of paper. Nicholas read it in silence, his jaw tightening as the words spelled out the disgusting familiarity of power misused. It was crude, manipulative, and clear. There would be no mistaking Garrett's intent. With this document, the case took on new weight. Now it wasn't just Anna's word against Garrett's reputation, it was a pattern of abuse. Michael amended the countersuit to include sexual harassment and retaliation. A media strategy was prepared, carefully worded and grounded in fact, so that if Garrett tried to leak more attacks, they'd be ready with the truth. Nicholas made the strategic decision to go public, not with Anna's full identity, to protect the children, but with a statement of support from his own name. The press release was subtle but direct. A prominent CEO standing behind a woman wrongfully accused of theft by a man he described as habitually predatory and unfit to hold power. The story caught fire online. Whispers became conversations. Garrett's firm released a statement distancing themselves from him, placing him on immediate leave. The board had no choice but to initiate an internal review. Anna watched it unfold from the safety of Nicholas's guest house, where she and her daughters had been staying temporarily. It was the first time in weeks that she had felt safe enough to breathe. She stood in the kitchen, watching her girls draw spaceships and unicorns on the marble counter with dry erase markers Nicholas had given them, and she finally allowed herself a small, exhausted smile. Later that evening, Nicholas found her in the garden, wrapped in a sweater, staring at the sky. She turned to him as he approached. "I didn't think anyone would ever believe me," she said. "Sometimes people need to see a spark before they realize what's burning," he replied. She looked at him with something different now, not gratitude, not disbelief, but recognition. "I don't know what you were before this, but whatever it was, this suits you better." Nicholas didn't reply right away. He thought about all the years he'd spent chasing control, shutting out emotion, avoiding mess. And now here he was, entangled in a life he hadn't seen coming, but one that suddenly felt more real than anything before. "I think I agree with you," he said. In the distance, the sound of the girls' laughter echoed through the house. And for the first time in a very long time, Nicholas Evans didn't feel like he was losing anything by standing still. He felt like he was finally starting to win something that mattered. The court date came faster than anyone expected, accelerated not by luck but by pressure, legal, public, and personal. Garrett Brown, who had been so confident in his ability to control the narrative, was now at the center of an unfolding scandal. The media had caught hold of the case's outline, not the salacious headlines Garrett feared, but the more dangerous kind, facts. Verified statements. Witness accounts. Documents. The court couldn't ignore it anymore. And Nicholas, who had once thought his role would end with hiring the right lawyer, found himself more involved than ever, not just as a supporter, but as a visible presence, a symbol that someone with influence was finally using it for someone else. On the morning of the hearing, Anna dressed carefully. Her hands trembled slightly as she buttoned the cuffs of a soft blue blouse that Nicholas's assistant had picked out for her, and which Anna insisted on paying for even if Nicholas refused the money. It wasn't vanity, it was pride. She didn't want to walk into that courtroom looking like a victim. She wanted to look like a woman who had survived everything meant to break her. Her daughters, too young to attend the hearing, stayed home under the care of Maria, the retired schoolteacher who now helped part-time with the girls. As Anna prepared to leave, her oldest daughter, Emma, hugged her tightly and whispered, "Be brave, like you always tell us." Michael Sloan met Anna at the courthouse steps. He was calm, collected, confident. A lawyer who didn't believe in intimidation but who knew how to devastate with the truth. Nicholas arrived shortly after, his presence commanding as always, but different now. There was warmth in his posture, not calculation. When Anna saw him, her expression softened, and she exhaled in a way that told him she had been holding her breath the whole morning. Inside, the courtroom was quiet but charged. On one side sat Anna, composed but visibly tense. On the other side, Garrett, with his new legal team, one that looked expensive but hurriedly assembled. He had the expression of a man unaccustomed to consequences. For so long, he'd spoken without fear, acted without resistance, and now, every tick of the clock seemed to unsettle him. The judge began by reviewing the amended countersuit. Michael spoke clearly, outlining the timeline of harassment and retaliation, supported by Lauren Chase's statement and the now widely publicized email Garrett had written years ago. When Garrett's lawyers attempted to undermine Anna's credibility, Nicholas stood and asked to be heard, not as a witness but as a character reference. The judge allowed it. Nicholas stepped forward, straightening his cuffs out of habit. His voice was calm but firm. "I've spent most of my life building systems that reward power," he began. "And I've come to learn that those same systems can protect the wrong people if no one speaks up." Anna Ray was nearly destroyed by one of those systems, not because she did something wrong, but because she refused to let someone exploit her. She is brave, resilient, and honest. I have no financial stake in this case. I'm not here because of a contract or a partnership. I'm here because the truth matters. And the only way this courtroom holds value is if it listens to voices that are usually ignored. There was silence when he finished, not out of awkwardness, but respect. Even the judge looked affected. Garrett's team declined to cross-examine. They had nothing to stand on. The weight of the truth had begun to crush the fiction Garrett had carefully built for years. The ruling wasn't immediate, but it didn't need to be. Everyone in that courtroom felt the shift. Anna had been heard. Fully. Publicly. Powerfully. And Garrett, though not yet convicted of anything criminal, was no longer protected by silence. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Anna, holding the legal summary in her hands, looked overwhelmed. Nicholas gently touched her shoulder and asked if she was okay. She nodded, barely able to speak. "I didn't think I'd make it through that." "You didn't just make it through," he said quietly. "You stood taller than anyone else in that room." They didn't give interviews. There was nothing to sell. No spin to craft. Instead, Nicholas guided her to the car, and they drove home without speaking much. But silence between them no longer felt like distance. It felt like understanding. That evening, Anna told her daughters everything, not the legal details, but the truth they needed to hear. That she had stood up to someone unfair. That she didn't give up. That she had people beside her who believed in doing the right thing, even when it was hard. The girls listened intently. Then the youngest one asked, "Does that mean he's gone forever?" Anna hesitated, then looked to Nicholas, who had been standing in the doorway, listening. He stepped into the room. "He won't be hurting anyone else," he said. "Not anymore." The girls nodded, satisfied in that childlike way that still believed in good people winning. And for the first time in weeks, the house felt whole again, not just safe, but alive with something new. Later that night, Anna stepped outside onto the porch, where Nicholas stood with a cup of tea, staring up at the stars. She joined him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Do you know what today felt like?" she asked. He looked at her. "What?" "Like the beginning of something I didn't think I'd ever get back. A voice. A future." He nodded. "Then let's build on it." And they stood together in the cool evening air, side by side, not needing to speak further. The worst had passed. The truth had been seen. And tomorrow no longer looked so far away. In the weeks following the court hearing, Anna's life began to shift in small, almost imperceptible ways, subtle at first, but unmistakably forward. The immediate threat was gone. Garrett Brown had been formally suspended from his firm pending further investigation, and with the civil case underway and the media keeping attention on the matter, the legal community began to quietly distance themselves from him. What was once whispered became openly acknowledged, and for the first time in her life, Anna was not the one being watched, but the one being supported. Yet even as things improved, healing was not instant. There were moments when she still woke in the night, startled by dreams of being chased down hallways or losing her children. She often found herself holding her breath in elevators, as though waiting for something to collapse. But now, for the first time, she had people in her corner who stayed when the pressure built. And among them, no one stood more firmly than Nicholas. Their relationship had developed quietly, organically, with no clear line between gratitude and something deeper. He never forced conversation, never overstepped, but he was always there, in the form of a warm meal after a long day, a gentle word when her nerves threatened to crack, or a moment of silent presence on the back porch when she simply didn't want to be alone. It was a companionship built on trust that neither of them rushed to define. Nicholas, for his part, found himself more grounded than he'd ever felt in his life. In the corporate world, he'd been a strategist, always 10 steps ahead, building empires on paper and behind boardroom doors. But none of it had ever felt like this, like walking into Anna's kitchen and helping a 6-year-old pour cereal without spilling, or listening to the girls argue over which movie to watch, or hearing the sound of real laughter after a meal that wasn't rushed or polished. He started spending more time away from his office, not out of avoidance, but because he no longer felt chained to it. He delegated more, trusted his team more, and for the first time, gave his assistant permission to cancel meetings when his heart wasn't in them. Grace, who had worked with him for nearly a decade, commented dryly one day, "I don't know who that woman is, but please thank her for returning your soul." Anna didn't know about that conversation, but she felt the change too. Her daughters adored him. They waited by the window when he was due to arrive, ran to him with drawings and questions, and treated him with the kind of ease they had only shown with each other. One day, her daughter Lily, the shyest of the four, tugged on her sleeve and whispered, "Is he going to stay with us forever?" The question was both innocent and impossibly complicated. Anna had no answer at the time. She simply kissed Lily's forehead and said, "Let's see what tomorrow brings." Nicholas wasn't just watching from the sidelines, he was actively helping her rebuild. He introduced her to a friend who ran a reputable law firm focused on family and labor cases. After just one interview, Anna was offered a job, not as a cleaner, but as a legal assistant. Her organizational skills, her first-hand understanding of injustice, and her quiet determination made her a natural fit. She started shadowing paralegals, learning the basics of case documentation and client coordination. For the first time, she saw the legal world not as a weapon used against her but as a tool she could learn to use for others. At night, she studied after the girls went to bed, scribbling notes on notepads and legal texts, sometimes falling asleep at the kitchen table. Nicholas would find her there, cover her with a blanket, and gently turn off the lamp. He never said much in those moments, never treated her like a project or someone to be fixed. He simply remained close. The kind of close that meant safety, not pressure. Their bond deepened in quiet ways. There was no grand confession, no dramatic moment. But one afternoon, as they were watching the girls play in the backyard, Anna turned to him and asked, "How did you end up being the one who showed up when no one else did?" Nicholas looked at her for a long moment, then answered, "Maybe I was meant to. Maybe everything else in my life was leading here, even when I didn't know it." She didn't say anything else, but she reached out and took his hand. And they stayed like that, together, not because of obligation or rescue, but because of choice. He wasn't trying to save her. She didn't need saving anymore. What they were building now was something neither of them had planned for. And yet, it felt exactly right. As summer approached, the house felt lighter. The girls thrived in school. Anna started training for a certification course that would eventually allow her to manage legal cases on her own, and Nicholas found joy in things that once seemed trivial. He cooked badly and proudly, burning toast and misjudging pasta portions, and the girls teased him for it relentlessly. They built routines around one another, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. There was a peace in the simplicity, a sense that for all the hardship they had endured, life was finally offering them something they hadn't dared hope for, a quiet, lasting kind of happiness. And it was in that quiet that something new began to bloom, not just healing, but the slow, sure promise of a future they would build together. As autumn arrived, the air grew cooler, but the warmth inside Anna's new life only deepened. She had found her rhythm, not just as a mother, but as a woman reclaiming her voice. Her mornings began early, preparing the girls for school, packing lunches, tying shoes, brushing tiny braids, and exchanging sleepy smiles over cereal bowls. Then she would ride the bus to the legal office where she was now working part-time while finishing her certification course. Her days were busy, challenging, and full of unfamiliar responsibilities, but they were hers. She no longer felt like she was surviving someone else's decisions. She was choosing, building, becoming. At the office, Anna's supervisors praised her reliability, her intuition, and her empathy. Clients trusted her because she spoke from a place of understanding, and her coworkers admired the quiet determination that carried her through every task. She didn't boast, didn't draw attention, but she became someone the others relied on. There were days she still battled doubt, moments where fear crept in, whispering that all this could be taken from her again. But now, when those moments came, she remembered Nicholas's steady presence and the girls' laughter echoing through the halls of the home they now shared. Nicholas, too, was changing in ways even he hadn't expected. He no longer carried the weight of his success with pride alone. His work remained important, but no longer all-consuming. He began investing differently, not just in business ventures but in people. Inspired by Anna's resilience, he started a small foundation that offered legal support and emergency housing for single parents facing wrongful accusations. What had started as a personal intervention was becoming a movement. He was still Nicholas Evans, the CEO, the strategist, the man with sharp suits and sharper instincts, but now he was also someone who knelt on the kitchen floor to help a child tie a shoe. Someone who remembered birthdays, who read bedtime stories, who learned how to make pancakes without burning them. Their relationship was no longer undefined. Though neither of them rushed to label it, everything about the way they moved around each other spoke of connection. There was a shared rhythm in their routines, a gentleness in their gestures. Nicholas never tried to replace what Anna had lost. He never called himself the girl's father, never assumed a role without invitation. But the girls didn't wait for titles. They had made their own decision about him long ago. One evening, while Anna worked late, Nicholas sat with them in the living room, helping with homework. Lily, the quietest, suddenly looked up and asked, "Will you be here when I grow up too?" He didn't answer right away. He put down the pencil, looked her in the eye, and said, "If you'll have me, yes." The next morning, Anna found a drawing on the refrigerator. It showed 6 figures holding hands, 4 little girls, a woman with long brown hair, and a tall man with a crooked smile. Above it, in bright crayon, the word family. Anna stared at it for a long time. She didn't cry, though her chest ached with something close to joy. Later that day, she pulled Nicholas aside, took his hand, and said, "They've already decided you're part of us." He smiled, his voice low. "Then I'm home." The seasons continued to turn. The court case was officially closed in Anna's favor. Garrett Brown settled quietly, his reputation beyond repair. Anna never once gloated. She refused interviews, declined attention. All she wanted was peace. And now, at last, she had it. Nicholas invited her to a formal dinner hosted by one of his oldest colleagues. She hesitated at first, unsure of whether she belonged in a room filled with polished executives and curated conversations, but eventually agreed. When the night came, she wore a simple dark green dress, and when she entered the ballroom on Nicholas's arm, no one saw a former cleaning woman or a victim of scandal. They saw a woman with quiet strength and poise, someone who held herself with dignity because she had earned every inch of it. At that dinner, Nicholas introduced her not as a guest, not as someone he was helping, but as his partner. And when she smiled at him across the table, surrounded by men and women who had once lived in an entirely different world, she no longer felt like she was standing outside looking in. She had built something new. With him. With the girls. With herself. And though they didn't say it out loud, both Nicholas and Anna knew, this wasn't a temporary arrangement, or a rescue story. This was a beginning. One neither of them had planned, but one they were now writing together, page by page, with hands that had once only known how to hold on, now learning how to hold each other. Spring arrived gently that year, not with sudden blooms or dramatic weather, but with small, hopeful signs that whispered change rather than shouted it. The trees in the backyard of Nicholas and Anna's home filled with fresh green leaves. The girls ran barefoot through the soft grass, collecting dandelions and creating games with rules only they understood. Their laughter became the background music of every evening, and it echoed through the windows, winding itself around the walls like a spell, one that meant safety, peace, and belonging. Anna's certification exam came and went. She passed with one of the highest scores in her group, something she hadn't expected but Nicholas had never doubted. On the day the results arrived, she held the letter in her hands without opening it for nearly an hour, afraid that even now, something might go wrong. When she finally unfolded the paper and saw the words, "Congratulations," she didn't cry or shout, she simply smiled and looked up at the ceiling, whispering a quiet "thank you" to whatever force had carried her this far. Nicholas found her that afternoon in the garden, standing barefoot on the stone path. He didn't ask what the letter said. He only looked at her face and knew. She nodded once, slowly, and he opened his arms. She walked into them, resting her head against his chest, and for several minutes, they stood in silence, two people who had walked through fire separately and somehow emerged together on the other side. They didn't need a big moment to define what they were anymore. Love had already woven itself into their days. It was in the way Anna always saved the last piece of fruit for him without mentioning it, and the way Nicholas remembered exactly how the girls liked their sandwiches cut. It was in the way they didn't interrupt each other's silences, in how they trusted one another with the truth, no matter how small or difficult. And it was in the way they made space for each other, not just physically, but emotionally. They didn't fill in each other's gaps. They let those gaps breathe, respected them, and walked forward anyway. When Nicholas asked Anna to marry him, it wasn't on one knee or under a sunset. It was over coffee, early one morning, when the house was still quiet and the girls were asleep. He passed her a small envelope across the table. Inside was a hand-drawn card made by the girls, with stick figures holding hands and the words, "Can we keep him forever?" written in pink crayon. Anna laughed softly, holding the card in both hands. Then Nicholas said, "I'd like to be part of this family, officially. If you'll have me." She looked at him for a long time, then whispered, "You already are." But she said yes anyway, because some moments deserve to be spoken aloud, no matter how obvious they feel. The wedding was small. Just close friends, the girls, Michael Sloane, Grace, and a few people from Anna's new job. It was held in their backyard beneath a white tent strung with soft lights. Anna wore a simple ivory dress that floated when she walked, and Nicholas wore a suit without a tie, his concession to the relaxed beauty of the day. The girls walked ahead of them, scattering flower petals with both joy and seriousness, as if they understood they were walking into something sacred. When the vows were spoken, Nicholas didn't promise to protect Anna. He promised to stand beside her. To listen. To grow. To never ask her to be smaller than she was. And Anna didn't promise to follow him. She promised to challenge him, to support him, and to never forget what they had both survived to find each other. After the ceremony, while the sun dipped low in the sky and the air was warm with spring, the girls took turns dancing with Nicholas, their laughter filling the yard. Emma wrapped her arms around his waist and looked up at him with a proud smile. "I knew you'd stay," she said. "I couldn't leave, even if I wanted to," he replied. "You've got me forever." Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the lights had been turned off, Anna and Nicholas sat on the porch, wrapped in a shared blanket, watching the stars. They didn't speak much. There was nothing more to explain. Everything they had been through, the courtroom battles, the fear, the uncertainty, the rebuilding, it all led here. Not to a perfect life, but to a true one. They hadn't erased their scars. They had grown around them. In the quiet hum of their shared future, they sat hand in hand, knowing the world might still be unpredictable, but that they had become the kind of people who didn't fear uncertainty anymore. They faced it together now. Side by side. And in that stillness, filled with the gentle breathing of a house finally at rest, Nicholas Evans and Anna Ray didn't just feel happy. They felt whole. In my view, the ending of this story isn't just satisfying, it's quietly profound. It doesn't rely on dramatic twists or fairy tale perfection, but instead offers something much more rare, emotional honesty and earned peace. What makes it powerful is how real the transformation feels. This isn't about a millionaire saving a struggling mother, or a woman being rescued. It's about two people, scarred in different ways, choosing each other not out of need, but out of mutual respect, healing, and growth. Nicholas doesn't fall in love with the idea of being a hero, he falls in love with reality, with responsibility, with children who look to him not for money but for presence, with a woman who never asked to be saved, only heard. Anna's arc is even more meaningful. She goes from being voiceless and discarded by a system to someone who reclaims her identity, not by fighting louder, but by standing stronger. The ending doesn't suggest that life is suddenly easy, only that it's finally shared. And that's what makes it beautiful. Because the deepest kind of happy ending isn't when everything's perfect, it's when two people find home in each other after learning how to survive the storms on their own. This isn't a love story with a rescue, it's a partnership that grew out of resilience. And those kinds of endings? They last.